BC's premier is calling the meeting between an Alberta separatist group and officials with the U.S. government treason.
About a group of people from Alberta, I won't describe them as Albertans, who went to the White House seeking the assistance of the United States to break up our country.
I would expect that the U.S. administration would respect Canadian sovereignty.
Canada explodes as Alberta supporters reach the White House. BC. Treason. Canada just hit a political breaking point as Alberta supporters reached the White House to discuss separation possibilities. What should have stayed a Canadian fight has now exploded into an international confrontation, shaking Canada to its core. Trust me, this is a national red alert moment that could redefine what unity, sovereignty, and loyalty even mean in Canada.
I don't know about treason. It's unacceptable. It's unethical. I'm a little disappointed that they've done this.
What froze people wasn't a policy announcement or a heated debate in Parliament. It was the simple fact that Alberta-linked figures showed up at the White House. That single detail flipped the entire story on its head. For a lot of Canadians, it felt unreal. Protests at home are one thing, referendum talk is another. But taking grievances across the border and walking them into the heart of US power, that crossed into territory most people never thought they would see in modern Canada. Overnight, what had been a domestic political fight turned into something far bigger and far more dangerous.
Something I'm dead against that. Going behind Canada's back and negotiating is unacceptable. We're one country, and we should all be sticking together. We shouldn't have groups going around the federal government's back.
This was seen as an escalation, not a message to Ottawa, but a message to Washington. That's why the reaction was so intense, because the moment you involve a foreign government, you're no longer just arguing about policy. You're inviting outside influence into Canada's internal future. For many Canadians, that felt like a line being crossed that you don't walk back from easily. It changed the emotional temperature of the country almost instantly.
I described it as an old-fashioned word because we haven't had to use it for a long time. In my opinion, that is treasonous activity, and it needs to be called out. It needs to be stopped. Now, I'm not talking about debates that we have inside the country, among Canadians about how we order ourselves. I'm talking about crossing the border, soliciting the assistance of a foreign government to break up this country, and I don't think we should stand for it.
And then came the word that poured gasoline on everything: treason. That word doesn't get thrown around lightly in Canada. It's not part of everyday political language. Canadian politics is usually measured, careful, even boring by global standards. So when a senior official used that word, it sent a clear signal. This wasn't being treated as normal political disagreement anymore. It was being framed as something that threatened the country itself.
I have always been clear that me and our United Conservative Caucus are supportive of a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. That is one of the bills that we passed when I first came in. But I think we also have to be realistic that 10 years under Justin Trudeau's government, our province was relentlessly attacked. Our economy was relentlessly attacked, not only for our economy, but our provincial rights and also our personal freedoms and our way of life.
The reasoning behind it was blunt. Canadians have the right to speak, to protest, to push for referendums. That's part of democracy. But there's a moral and political boundary that has always existed. You don't go to a foreign power to ask for help breaking up your own country. That's where free speech ends and something much darker begins. That's why officials drew such a hard line. Not because people are angry, not because people want change, but because they took that fight outside Canada.
What we need to do is we need to give Albertans hope. We need to show them, not just tell them, not just words, but with actions, that Canada can work.
The White House made it even more explosive. The US has a long history of involvement in other countries' political outcomes, directly or indirectly. Whether fair or not, that history shapes perception. So when Canadians heard about Alberta-linked figures seeking attention there, it triggered deep suspicion. People started asking hard questions. What exactly was asked for? What kind of support, political backing, public statements, quiet influence? Even without answers, the damage was done. The story became international the moment that door was opened.
I think Canadians responded in a way that I'm proud of, which is never. We're never going to be the 51st state. I think that it's really important that we stick together.
That's why public perception shifted almost overnight. What some might have seen as a regional protest suddenly looked like something more extreme. The The movement was no longer just pressuring Ottawa. It was seen as inviting Washington into Canada's future. For many Canadians, that felt like a betrayal of national sovereignty. It touched a nerve that goes far deeper than oil, taxes, or federal policy. It went straight to identity.
Premier Smith's comments just then, we expect the U.S. administration to respect Canadian sovereignty. I'm always clear in my conversation with President Trump to that effect, and then move on to what we can do together.
It also signaled how seriously the federal government and senior officials were taking this. They were treating it as a warning sign, a shot across the bow, a message to anyone else thinking of taking domestic disputes to foreign capitals. The message was simple. There is a line, and this crossed it.
Now I understand the desire to hold a referendum, to talk about the issues we want to talk about in Canada. We got free speech, that's important. But to go to a foreign country and to ask for assistance in breaking up Canada, there's an old-fashioned word for that, and that word is treason. It is completely inappropriate.
That forced Canadians to pick emotional sides. Even people who sympathize with Alberta's frustrations suddenly felt uncomfortable. You can agree with grievances and still reject the method. That's what made this so divisive. It split not just regions, but opinions within the same regions. Some saw it as desperation. Others saw it as reckless. Many saw it as dangerous. It also raised fears about precedent. If one group goes to the White House, what stops others from doing the same? What happens if internal Canadian disputes start being played out on the global stage as a strategy? That's how sovereignty gets weakened from the inside. Not through invasion, not through war, but through internal fractures being exported.
Or the provinces back to negotiate something with the U.S. We all know where President Trump stands. He wants Canada, and that's not going to happen.
Once the dust from the White House shock started to settle, a much bigger issue came roaring to the surface: sovereignty. That word suddenly stopped being something you only hear in textbooks or late-night political panels. It became personal. Because when a senior Canadian official openly said the US president hasn't been particularly respectful of Canada's sovereignty, people didn't hear that as a throwaway line. They heard it as a warning. A reminder that Canada is friendly with the US, but it's not supposed to be dependent on it. And yet here were Canadians walking into Washington asking for help with Canada's future. That hit a nerve.
So I think we got to be mindful of the fact that a lot is going to happen over the next few months to try and make us negotiate from a weaker position. And we just have to be calm, we have to be strong, and we have to find a way to get back on the lead foot.
It forced a really uncomfortable realization. Canada's unity isn't some unbreakable force field. It's fragile. It depends on trust. It depends on the idea that even when provinces are angry, they still believe the fight belongs inside Canada. The White House visit cracked that illusion. It made people ask, if things get bad enough, will groups just start shopping Canada's problems to other countries? That's not a hypothetical anymore. That's a fear people suddenly felt in their gut.
We're crushing those targets. I mean, we need 12 to make the 178,000. We need approximately 12,000 signatures a week. I mean, everybody's seen the lineups going out into the dark Alberta January nights everywhere we go.
Now, none of this erases Alberta's frustrations. That's where things get complicated. Alberta hasn't been angry for 5 minutes. This has been building for years. Energy policy, federal regulations, equalization payments, a sense that decisions are being made far away by people who don't feel the local impact. Those complaints didn't come out of nowhere. They've been repeated so often that they've become part of Alberta's political identity, and for a long time, a lot of Canadians outside Alberta at least understood the frustration, even if they didn't agree with all of it. There was space for debate, there was room for sympathy, but the moment foreign outreach entered the picture, that balance shifted. What had been seen as legitimate grievances started to look like something else. Not protest, not pressure, provocation.
To seek to weaken Canada, to seek to go and ask for assistance to break up this country from a foreign power. And with respect, a president who has not been particularly respectful of Canada's sovereignty.
That's the turning point. When you move from yelling at Ottawa to knocking on Washington's door, you change how people see you. It stops looking like a fight for fairness and starts looking like a challenge to the country itself. That's where support starts to evaporate. Even people who might have said, yeah, Alberta has a point, suddenly backed away, because now the issue wasn't just policy, it was method. And the method made people uncomfortable.
There is no interference from the United States, and they are respecting Canada's sovereignty in these matters, right? There's no, we're not being told what to do by anybody we're meeting with in Washington. We're exchanging information, right? Which is perfectly appropriate.
It also made the movement look more radical than it may have intended. Once foreign involvement is even hinted at, everything feels more extreme. The story gets darker. The tone gets sharper. What could have stayed as a tough internal political struggle suddenly felt like it was crossing into dangerous territory that alienated people fast. Across the country, the reaction wasn't just disagreement, it was distrust. Opposition parties in Ottawa wasted no time. They turned it into a political weapon. Accusations flew, fingers pointed, statements got sharper. Every press conference became a chance to score points. It stopped being just about Alberta. It became about leadership, control, and whether the federal government had lost its grip on national unity. The story took over the political agenda. The narrative shifted fast. It wasn't Alberta versus Ottawa anymore. It became Canada versus its own internal fracture. That's a much more dramatic frame.
For Premier Smith to stand up and say enough is enough. And either you're with Canada or you're not with Canada.
And then there's the historical echo. This is where the emotion really kicks in. Canadians don't talk about war and sacrifice every day, but it's always there in the background. The stories of grandparents, great-grandparents, people who fought, worked, and struggled to build a country that could stand on its own. Unity isn't just a slogan in Canada. It's part of the national story. So when officials talked about forefathers, foremothers, parents, grandparents, it wasn't just sentimental, it was deliberate. It was a reminder that Canada wasn't handed to anyone. It was built, protected, held together through hard times. For a lot of people, the idea of asking a foreign power to help break that apart felt like a slap in the face to that history.
We need to express, in this moment, especially when the country faces such a profound threat, we need to express that we will fight for this country, that we'll stand up for it, and that those who don't wish to, those who would solicit a foreign government to try to come in and take over our country or break it up, that's not part of our vision for Canada. That's not Canadian conduct.
This stopped being just about Alberta. It became about identity, about what it means to be Canadian, about whether unity is still the default or whether fragmentation is becoming normal. That's a heavy shift, because once a country starts questioning that, the politics stop being just politics. They become personal.
This is what we should be doing when there's so much uncertainty. We're under attack by President Trump. We need to be united, a united Canada.
And that's why this story feels bigger than one province. It feels like a stress test on Canada itself. A moment where people are being forced to decide what lines can't be crossed, no matter how angry, no matter how frustrated, no matter how fed up. The humor in all of this, if there is any, is dark. Because Canada, known for being calm and polite, suddenly found itself having a very loud, very uncomfortable conversation about loyalty, sovereignty, and where the fight really belongs. Not in Washington, not in another capital, but right here inside Canada. Here's where the story stops being about what already happened and starts being about what could happen next. And honestly, that's the part that makes people nervous. Because if this kind of foreign-assisted breakaway effort becomes normal, everything changes. Not overnight, not with one dramatic headline, but slowly.
There are, as Premier Smith has said, many Albertans with very deep, legitimate and long-standing grievances about how the Federation has treated our province, and more particularly our resource industries, and Ottawa needs to demonstrate it's sensitive to those concerns.
That's the Pandora's box problem. Once it's open, good luck trying to close it. If reaching out to foreign governments becomes part of the political playbook, Canada's internal disputes stop being Canadian. They become international bargaining chips. Provinces stop just arguing with Ottawa and start shopping their grievances to whoever might listen. That's not a healthy federation. That's a country slowly turning its internal politics into a global free-for-all. And let's be real, Other provinces are watching, not necessarily because they want to leave, but because they're learning what's possible. They're learning what gets attention. They're learning what creates pressure. If the lesson becomes go foreign to get leverage, that's a dangerous incentive. It turns frustration into a strategy, and once that mindset takes hold, unity becomes optional instead of assumed. The long-term damage doesn't stop at home. Canada's global standing takes a hit too. Countries don't just see a calm, stable partner anymore. They see a country that can't keep its own house in order. A country that looks internally divided is a country that looks weaker on the world stage. That's not about pride, that's about power, and perception matters more than people like to admit.
This is a country my grandparents fought for, that many people before them helped to build. It's made up of First Nations who've been here since time immemorial, as well as immigrants who just got off the airplane today with hearts full of hope of their new adopted country.
Worse than that, it weakens Canada from the inside. Every regional dispute starts feeling heavier. Every disagreement feels like it could turn into something bigger. That's how internal strength gets chipped away. That's why officials keep coming back to the same message. There is a line. Protest, debate, vote, argue, organize. All of that is fair game. But once you start asking foreign powers to step into Canada's internal future, you've crossed into something else entirely. That's the red line. This moment is bigger than one group. It's a defining moment for Canada, a test of whether unity is still the default setting or whether fragmentation is becoming normal behavior. The country is being forced to choose, not on paper, but in attitude. Do Canadians still believe that Canada's problems belong to Canadians, or are they okay with exporting those problems to outside players? This VO when image appears on screen.